Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Thanks so much for your company for this special episode on Greats with Garby, and a guest that I am pumped to have on board. I know this will be a chat that will have many a sports fan enthralled. I'll introduce him in a moment, but he is brought to you by our sponsor, and that is Lockdown Essentials. Now, this critical time for our country, Lockdown Essentials are keeping you safe with disposable face masks, hand sanitizer, plenty other products as well that you need to get through this pandemic. They are experiencing enormous demand, I can tell you at the minute. So make sure you log on and order what you need at lockdownessentials.com.au. That is lockdownessentials.com.au. Pretty straightforward. They provide free shipping across Melbourne, but distribute all over Australia. It is great to have them keeping families safe, and great to have them as a supporter of Greats with Garby and a sponsor of the episode with this man, a 29-time Socceroo, a Socceroo captain, and for so long, a passionate advocate and analyst on the game of football in this country through his work on SBS, of course. He is Craig Foster, and I'm delighted to say that he is with me now. Fozzie, great to have you on board.
Yeah, nice to talk to you, Garby. First of all, let me say, Lockdown Essentials, I'm going to be in touch with them, so you better put me in touch. I need some free masks, I need some free gloves for our volunteering place over here at Addison. So I'm delighted that they're on board. I'll be sending them an email.
Thank you very much for doing so, and I'll make sure they get in touch as well. Great to have them as a sponsor, and great to have you on Greats with Garby. Now, Fozzie, I don't think you will remember the first time we met. In fact, I'm almost certain you won't. It was at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, Cape Town. I was there as a young journalist. You were obviously covering it for SBS. We were at the world-famous Cafe Caprice Beach Bar in Camps Bay, which, as anyone will attest if they've been there, one of the great beach bars on earth. Amazing place. It was Argentina-Mexico round of 16 clash. I saw you in there watching the game, and I made a choice to chew your ear off for the next 90 minutes and more about all things Australian football. One thing I do remember from that day, though, is that your brother was there. It was winter. He was wearing a scarf. That's Paul Foster. Looked exactly like Roberto Mancini for mine with his scarf. And as the lineups and formations came up of Argentina and Mexico, the analysis from the two of you on the formations and the teams and everything the two managers were doing was something else. It was a moment that stood out for me.
Yeah, look, I do remember that moment, and it was a beautiful place. I remember that cafe and the bar around that area well because, you know, we were there with Les as well. And so we had a stadium in Cape Town and, you know, that Greenpoint Stadium. We had a studio on top of the stadium, and we would go almost every lunch across there, the Camps Bay, and, you know, we'd sit out and he'd have his beanos and he'd have a couple of fags and we would just talk football. And, you know, those World Cup times were just very, very special, like a dream really, because we'd be there almost 6 weeks, you know, as you'd understand, we'd go probably 10 days before, test studio, do all these things. And, you know, that's not onerous. You know, it's probably a couple of hours a day. Most of the staff are working really hard, long hours, you know, setting it up and all the electrics and all of the wiring. And we'd kind of stroll in and just, you know, test the mics for 20 minutes and off we'd go, you know, for a week before. And, of course, that's when the teams are arriving. That's when the excitement's building. It's just very, very special time. So I remember that area really fondly.
It was amazing. The last thing you needed after all of that was me asking you 1,000,001 questions about Australian football, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and that afternoon had a big impact on me. And here we are, almost 10 years to the day, talking again about your life and times and all things Australian football, no doubt. So it's great to have those two correlate. Fozzie, it's not long since you decided to leave SBS, to leave that world that you just spoke about and go for a new venture and a new journey. Why? Why the call now? Why have you come to this decision?
It's just time. Life changes and we all grow and evolve. And, it's been a wonderful 18 years at SBS. And in some respects, I'll never leave the place, because I believed in not just the mission of football, but also the mission of multiculturalism. So it was really the perfect home in a number of ways. Of course, it was a place that had a long history of believing deeply, not just in the game, but what the game could do for Australia. And, that was where Johnny came from, and that's what really resonated with me. It was never just about our love of the game or just wanting to sit on air and talk about football, as special as that is. They always used to use the word evangelise the game. That's the word Les really loved. And they believed in it very strongly, and so did I. But also this concept of what football could do for the country, this sense of inclusion and diversity and multiculturalism that in football we naturally live and we believe in very deeply. So, that was a wonderful period. But at the same time, in recent years, my interests have also broadened out. Funnily enough, it's all more or less through football, and football's provided me with a world view and with a platform to help other people. And I guess over the last 18 years, a lot of organisations and people have come to me, being on air at SBS, and minority communities and those who are, feeling marginalised, and have asked for support. And so over, I think the progression of life as an athlete often is, whether you're going to broadcasting or not, is to kind of be playing and then work and then helping social programs through ambassadorship, so you'll see that very often with high-profile athletes. Secondly is to kind of get it a bit more embedded in the programs and start to work in them. Thirdly is to, become a director and start to have some influence. And fourthly, then you ultimately recognise that you have to make more substantive change in society to change these issues. So you have to go to policy change, you have to work in the political space, and the more that I've been working there in recent years, whether that's in refugees or Indigenous rights or climate or all of these social issues I feel strongly about, I'm spending increasing amount of time there and feeling increasingly passionate about making social change both in Australia and around the world, in part through sport, but also sometimes outside of sport. And therefore those interests mean that, I can't spend as much time at SBS as I once did. And of course, within that context, Garby, the rights at SBS have also diminished, so we just don't have as much football as we used to have. And therefore, the opportunities there in future to do World Cups and to do other major football events, with the network, of course, and with my great friend Lucy. But in the interim, there's many more challenges to face.
You're inspiring people while you set on this new journey, and the work that you're doing in human rights and with disadvantaged groups in society. It's been wonderful to see. So the first time since 1988, you'll have no formal public link to the game, although there'll be a very strong informal link, of course. That will never dissipate. But we all saw the two worlds that you just spoke about collide through your work with Hakim Al Arabi, which was just unbelievable and grabbed the attention of the entire nation. The Bahraini national, the former footballer detained in Thailand. How proud are you of the work you did there, the relationship that you've got with Hakim? Where's that at now? And was that the catalyst to say, all right, now I need to take this and make it full time?
If there's any pride, I'm proud of what football did, and I'm proud of what sport did. And I'm proud of what the Matildas did. I'm proud of what the PFA did. I'm proud of what Brendan Schwab did at World Players United. I'm proud of John Didlitzer and Sam Kerr, who stood up, and the football fans who went to the Asian Cup, in January of last year in UAE, and who were protesting for Hakim in UAE, which actually was quite dangerous, but just showed the level of a social conscience that people within football had. And I'm proud that all of sport in Australia, almost all of it, but a very large section, and Australia generally, was capable of stepping forward and helping this kid. That's what I'm proud of. My role was just one of many. And there was a huge team working behind the scenes, and that's the reality of life. Is there's often it's like TV, okay? It's like your job used to do on Fox, okay? And that is, so you know better as well as me, that what we do on air comes after hundreds and thousands of hours of work of people behind the scenes who are putting all of that together. And, okay, we have to do our own research, and we, you know, there's some acumen and there's experience and expertise that, you have to bring on air. But people behind the scenes are working incredibly hard. So, you know, and that's what I learned as a player, and it's rung true in every aspect of my professional or social life. That is, it's all about team. You know, it's all about all of the people who are working hard to get to some outcome. You know, we're the ones who sit on air and in many respects take the plaudits, or, you know, the opposite can also be the case. But we love it. And Hakeem's case, you know, Save Hakeem was very much like that. It was a period I just look back on as one of just incredible intensity. And those 77 days was, an amazing time, because we had a purpose that is actually quite rare in life, you know, and that was the beauty of SBS. You know, at SBS we could go in there every day, and the entire team in the whole sports department back in the day, we'd go and see Les, with Les in his office and just talk about football for 5 hours. You know, you're talking about a whole team who had, there was a purpose. You know, that purpose was to sell the game to Australia. You know, it's very different to just working broadly on sport or just, being a presenter on television. And I did plenty of sports news on World News Australia as well, and that was very different. The reason that I did that was because I wanted to, or I was asked to do it, firstly. And secondly, I thought, well, and this is often my thinking, was, well, we haven't had too many ex-players, ex-internationals, Socceroos or Matildas, who are, working on one of the main channels. SBS, of course, is small, nevertheless, is an important channel. And doing these things. Okay, it's important for our people from sport to take steps into new fields. And that's also part of my thinking at the moment. And that is that we haven't had too many former internationals really driving hard on human rights and on social issues within Australia. You know, we've had some people from other games, not many, but we certainly haven't had people from football. And I happen to believe that in order for Australia, I genuinely believe that Australia needs football. I genuinely believe that they need our multicultural nature. And in order to get there, we need everyone within football to be striking out into important social stratas and into positions, of influence and authority. And so that's also part of the thinking. You know, I've done what I did at SBS. There's now opportunities to speak to Australia in a different way. And that's always not just as Craig Foster. That's as Craig Foster, ex-Socceroo and ex-SBS. It's that whole package. That's the part that I'm kind of proud of, is that we come out of this game and we're able to go and, and do these things. People from other sports often say to me, well, why is it, in part because of SBS at 18 years, which is about multiculturalism, right? But when they say, well, in our sports, we're not so attuned to cultural competency and, the way you guys, you're talking about the Muslim community and you're talking about the South Sudanese and, the Africans and South Americans and I just say to them, the reality is that's football because that's our community, that's our family. And so, people in football perhaps don't reflect on it that much, but it's actually a real gift because it puts us in a position where we are genuinely advocates of equality. We are genuinely advocates of for minorities and of racial equality. And all these things are very, very natural to us. It's not as though we have to come to them. What's happened in my life is it's just evolved to a point where I have an opportunity, I have numerous platforms to just bring that to life and to talk to Australia about it. So, that's so Hakeem was just one part of that. It was an important part of that transition because you can't help but be changed by something like that. For all of us, it's a challenge to strike out into new areas, and all of us have to, take those steps at times. And as I said in the book about it, Fighting for Ken, that was not without some reticence and even fear, because that was about trying to run this global campaign. You never quite know what's going to happen. And then to go to Bangkok and all those things. And looking back on it, it's just one of those transition moments in your life where you take a really big new step, as you've done here, okay? And, there's many football and sport, but football journalists in the country now are having to transition into something else, either through choice or otherwise, doesn't matter. It's just an inflection point at which you get to choose, and you reflect and say, okay, I've come through all that and now I've got this range of new skills and this is who I am now. I'm not the same person as 10 years ago. I have changed, and if you haven't, well, you've got problems. You have to change. And so what does that mean now? How can I make the greatest impact? So I used to think, how can I make the greatest impact? So 20 years ago, I was trying to make the greatest impact in football, for Australia, not just for the game. It was never for the game. And so let's get this football sorted out, and then let's sell this to Australia, and let's get Australia in a better place through this. And now I'm trying to make the greatest impact with football, but more broadly in other ways, and also not just in Australia, also around the world.
The passion that you speak about in Australian football and the need for it to all come together certainly did on one night in 2005. That famous night against Uruguay and the World Cup drought was over. And I wanted to link this question to your relationship with Les Murray and Johnny Warren, who tragically passed away just before that moment. And amid all the euphoria of John Eloise's penalty, no one listens at the time because we're all just screaming. But later on, we hear it back, and you mention Johnny Warren's name, and you can hear the passion in your voice. What were you thinking in that exact moment? And just take us through your emotions of that night, because we all love reliving it.
Well, the emotions were too great. They were just too great. They overwhelmed me, and I just couldn't deal with it. That's the reality. All right, and that obviously came through on the commentary. Right, I really couldn't handle it. And Les knew that was building. So I probably in the week before, I was a bit of a mess. And because, that was only 05, was only 97, wasn't that long before, it didn't feel very long before to me anyway as a player. It felt like just the day before that, we'd failed against Iran. And, of course, a number of that team still in that squad come out of that game. So it was still an era where many of them were my actual teammates. So I was in touch with them. I knew what was going on, and I felt that tension, similar to 97, but perhaps worse. Because when you're not on the field, you have no control in it. I always found that really difficult as a player. That is, when you're emotionally involved, but you can play no part in the outcome. You're just helpless. And that the tension of that was always far, far worse, because as a player, you learn you can't play as an international unless you've learned to deal with the natural nerves of playing professional sport. So every successful sports person learns techniques, or for some is innate, or whatever the case is. They obviously get to the point where they're able to shut it out in their own way and then be able to perform. Whereas on air, there's no way of shutting it out because you can't pull the boots on. You can't go through a pre-match routine. And that is always the most difficult part for me. When Australia's playing in a big game, Italy was the same. The nerves in that game were just too much. They're just too much. And I would always say to Les, this is what Australia needs. We go back to that point before, when Kathy Freeman ran in, her famous gold medal winning race in the 2000 Olympics, all of Australia were on the edge of the seat, and that was wonderful. But we can only imagine the level of tension when the Matildas make a World Cup final. Okay? And we can only imagine the tension when the Socceroos make a World Cup final. And we know that because of when we were in the round of 16 against Italy, that was just something extraordinary. In fact, when we went out, got that penalty against us and went out, and then we tried to make some sense of it on air, and we were both in tears, Les and I. Yeah. As soon as it was over and the cameras went off, I remember turning to him and saying, well, you know what, we were always going to go out somehow, and if we're going to go out, this is not a bad way to do it, because in every great football country has a tale of tragedy, and we had 97. And there, and if you're going to go out, you don't want to go out limply. You want to go out with a good story about how you were robbed, right? But I said to him, but it's true, because what we were always interested in, we wanted to tie Australia to the game through emotion.
Yeah.
Okay? We wanted to, well, in many ways, actually, we wanted to tie them to the game intellectually. We wanted to get them interested. We wanted to take them deeper into the tactics, deeper into the culture, deeper into the history. That's what it was about. It was trying to tap into different emotions of as many Australians as possible and tie them to the game with a rope, right? And as we always say, once we get you in, we don't let you out, because there's just too big a world in here, right? So and Italy was like that. The Uruguay game was very much like that. It was, this is a moment which could potentially catapult this game and always the country to a different place. And if we get there, this is going to be something special. And we've got Huss on board, which means not only did I believe he was capable of doing it, but it means that it's going to be a big story. You've got a big personality taking us to a World Cup for the first time in 30. See, all of those strands just made me more tense and emotional because, I was thinking, if we make this, having Huss at the World Cup puts us on the stage. Like, he's the big name. So people want to know him. Australia's interested. That was the reality of the game then, was that someone like that was necessary, to get the whole country excited. So we had all of the elements were in place, and we just needed to get through that game. So when it came to the end, the day before, Les said to me, listen, you just need to be careful because, I can see that you're, quite emotional about it, and, you can't just completely lose it on air. And I said to him, well, I'm going to try, buddy. I'm going to try, right? But, I said to him, listen, if you don't want me to do the commentary, you're most welcome, because I never really enjoyed doing the co-coms. I never trained in it. I was, I enjoyed talking about the game, the policy, the history, the politics, and the tactics. But being a co-commentator was never my profession. I never saw it that way. They would always force me to do it, and it's okay, if you want me to do it, I'll do it. But I said, look, I'm going to try and prepare, and but the reality was, I was so nervous. I never prepared for the fact that we might get through, because I also didn't want to jinx it. It was like a typical footballer. So when we came to that moment, Simon Hill, being a consummate professional, as you know, he'd prepared, of course, the opening to the game, and all of these things, not just his stats, but as you know, a commentator will read an opening intro. They need to start well and they need to finish well. Yeah. So he, of course, had the three, all of the scenarios mapped, ready to talk about it. If we got through, well, it's a marvellous moment for Australia, or whatever it was he said. I don't listen to it again. But, and, of course, I had nothing. I was just screaming like a complete idiot. So poor old Simon. And I remember I was crying because all the people in the commentator booth were crying. Like, everyone was physically in tears. And I remember just looking at them all, and I'm looking at them and everyone, because these are our friends. We've been there. I've been there some years by that time. And Simon's trying to read his script into the microphone. He also knows that this moment is going to be iconic. This is going to be historic. So you have to get it right as a commentator. Like, he knows. Yeah. But I didn't care about any of that. I was just going, and in some ways that's not great, because I was paid to be a professional. But in other ways, it's kind of appropriate, right? Because that's the level of passion that the game brings out in us.
But also, that's what everyone was feeling at the time. Like, you screaming, that's what everyone was doing. So Simon's words came out in the end and we got them in time, but it completely mapped out the emotions. So I don't think there was anything out of place with it. It's just funny listening to you.
No, it was kind of a nice mix in the end. But the thing about Johnny, so what happened is, that's right, I hadn't planned to, but I think as I was screaming and yelling, I looked over to the left-hand corner of ANZ Stadium and I saw the "I told you so" sign, and it just hit me about Johnny. And I tried to scream, "Johnny Warren, I told you so," and I only got as far as Johnny Warren. And I don't know why, but in my mind I wanted to say, look, let's think of Johnny. But in that moment, look, today I'm pleased that I got his name in. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever having inserted it in there, but it actually was appropriate that he played, at least he's mentioned in that moment.
Yeah, well, of course it was. And I think people loved your passion in co-commentary, and I think you did a wonderful job as an analyst. I think you were without peer across Australian sport as an analyst, and it was in the studio that you had a big impact as well, and especially after Socceroos games, be they successful or not, your post-mortem was must-watch television. And the Germany game stands out, and Pim Verbeek, we've celebrated him recently. It's tragic that we've lost him, but obviously in that moment the performance wasn't good enough, and you targeted Pim straight up, and you said that he should resign or that he should be sacked after that job. The emotions came forward, and it was a powerful message. How do you reflect on that one now?
Well, we all grow older and evolve. And, if I had the same moment today, I'd probably say the same thing, but in a different way. Yeah, that's just the reality. That's life. But the reason I always had a reason for doing what I did. I could lose emotion, like when we got through past Uruguay. But other times I was always reflecting on, and I was trying to think, what does the game need at this point? That's how I did the job. And what happened then was I knew what had been happening in the build-up to the game, and often, being close to the team and a former player and all those things, we're privy to a lot of things that we either don't want to or we can't say on air. And, I knew that there was already some issues. And further to that, the most important thing, in my view, was always that Australia was going to approach the game in a certain way. And why was that important? It was for two reasons. Number one is because I believed that it was going to give us the best opportunity to be successful. And secondly, I believed then, and I still believe today, that it is what is going to sell the game to Australia. And this concept of, Australia going against any opponent and, if you like, taking backwards steps and was something that I think actually is damaging to the game in the Australian sporting landscape. So often at those times it wasn't just about football. I was actually thinking about Australia. And because the ultimate objective for us was not just to enjoy the game and be successful in the game, it was for the game to be successful. And those games were huge moments for Australian football within the Australian cultural context. And unfortunately, I knew at that moment that the way we'd approach that game meant that the audience, the number of Australians who were going to return for the second game, was going to be severely diminished. And that actually is just the reality. And so I didn't agree with it. The other thing about those types of moments is my view back then, and it certainly hasn't changed, is that Australia needs to become comfortable with having debates and arguments about football. And we weren't back then. We weren't. And so my approach was to say, look, we have to be able to have strong views, which are not personal. It had nothing. In fact, I had a good relationship with Pim, and his assistant, and we spoke at an airport only several days after that. In fact, when Pim got here, I had a really great chat with him. When I said to him, "Listen, that at times I may not agree with you." Because I've seen your football there. I know what's happening, blah, blah, blah. But, you need to understand that it's got nothing to do with you, And he said, yeah, I perfectly understand that. I said to him, one of the things, but the main thing I like about the Dutch football culture is that you guys are able to have really robust discussions around tactics, team selection, coaches, everyone. And it's very much accepted. That's one part I really like about their football culture. And I told him that. I said, so you're coming from a country, this is actually the discussion I had with him. I said, you're coming from a country where having really robust football discussions is commonplace. And you are one of the best countries in the world. Okay, you've got only 19 million people and you're here. Our country's not like that, Pim. Okay, in our country, if we say something against a coach, people think that it's something personal. If we say something about an administrator, they think we're attacking the game. I told him that. And I said, look, it has to change. Okay, and part of my role is to try and change that. Okay, so where you've come from, you understand it. And so you understand where I'm coming from. And he said, I understand it perfectly. In fact, I caught up with him on a number of occasions. So, he certainly would have understood where I was coming from. And what I was saying was, as much to the game, was to Australia, that this is actually not the approach that Australian football should be taking.
Yeah.
So that discussion, I think, still continues today. The game is still not in a place for many reasons. One reason is because so many journos leaving the game. But another reason is because the game has worked very hard to shut down debate. And we're still in a place where, if I was to be critical of something that James Johnson is doing, okay, which I have a responsibility as a former player, people would think that I'm attacking him.
Yeah.
And, I never understood it, but I think we need to move past that. A really good example, for instance, is the Matildas in the France World Cup.
Yeah.
And my relationship with Ante Milicic is very good, as it is with all former players. And Ante understood that I'm going to question the way that he's setting up the defensive platform, and I'm perfectly willing to say that I disagree with it. I think perhaps this should happen, and it's got nothing to do with him. It's got nothing to do with him. It's got nothing to do with him, his family, his wife, his kids, his house, his school. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So that's a really important thing, for Australian football to get beyond. And the example I was going to use was when Heather Garriock was critical of, how she thought that the Matildas were playing. And I thought that was really important that we have a legendary Matilda who is capable of actually holding the team as a group accountable and the direction of women's football accountable and the Matildas coach accountable. And the point is, you don't have to agree with her.
Yeah.
The point is, she actually has a responsibility to do that. So Australian football has this kind of cognitive dissonance often, because when things aren't, or if there's issues where the governing body or others aren't being held accountable, often they'll come to me. And in fact, many coaches came to me over many years and said, why aren't you saying this, that, 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 that? So when it's in people's favour, they really want us to be strong advocates. And you know this as well as me. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
So there's this real hypocrisy in the game that's quite extraordinary. So they'll say, oh, listen, just let you know, this is happening over here and da-da-da. So if I was going to be critical of someone that was going to open the job for someone else, they'd be absolutely delighted for me to do that. Okay? But then when they're in a role, they don't want it to happen. Yeah. And it's the same with administrators and everyone, right? So we kind of understand the importance of the media holding the game accountable. We just don't want it to happen when we're in that particular seat. And that's a real issue with Australian football that I see every day.
One of the other great moments on SBF, and we spoke about the Pim Verbeek moment, the post-mortem after the Germany game, but the Ange Postecoglou interview, people still talk about it in great detail and watch over it for pure entertainment. And Ange is someone who never took a backward step when he was Socceroos coach, but you were obviously very critical of him in that interview. How do you reflect on that one, Fozzie, all these years later, considering where Ange is now? Oh, look, like as I said before, with many other instances, would I frame it differently today? Of course. I'm 51, I was early 30s. So, we evolve in the way that we can use language and get the same argument across. The argument is the same, though. The argument is that national coaches need to be held to a high standard. They need to be held accountable. And quite simply, it wasn't happening at that time. In fact, later on, and no one's more delighted with
the success that Ange is having today. You know, I'm just absolutely thrilled for him and more so for Australian football. Because it's that was always one of our great dreams, was to export coaches and start to do well around the world. But actually, I think it was when Ange was the national coach, he said something really important. Oh, maybe he'd left it or something. And he came back and did an interview. And I saw he said something like, oh, it's really important. Oh, our coaches need to be under great scrutiny. I think he went across to England or something and did a study tour or something like that. I don't know. I didn't really.
It was an interview with me, and he said there should be more criticism of the A-League. It was when he was in London. He was doing some study basically at different clubs, and he says we need to be more critical.
Okay, and why did he say that?
He said we talk so much about things around the game, crowds and the weather and all these sorts of things, and not criticising the actual game. And he said that's where things need to change. We need to hold our own players and our own coaches to account more.
Okay, so there's your answer. Yeah, there's your answer.
Yeah.
So my question is, why was he saying that? What was the meaning behind what? Why do you need to hold the players and coaches accountable more? Why?
He thinks it will lead to. My recollection was a better football culture, a greater football intellect, and an improvement of the standing of the game as a whole, because we're talking about things that are actually more interesting than other things on the outside.
Okay. So my recollection was that also, in order to create coaches to go to the highest level of the game, in other countries they're already under pressure. They have a certain level of pressure that we don't have, and therefore, and that's the same for players. So players need to be put in an environment where their performance is scrutinised and where people can have a whole range of opinions about them on a high level. And once they can exist and thrive within that environment, that prepares them to go into the EPL or other. And therefore, I agree with that. So I agree with him 100%. Challenging conversations are called that for a reason. And we've had many over the last 20 years in football, but they've all been absolutely necessary. And, in many respects, I think particularly in terms of the thinking, Australian football has come a long, long way.
That's interesting, and you certainly did challenge. I think you said with the Pim Verbeek incident after the Germany game that if you had your time again, you may have done it differently. Is that the same with the Ange interview, just done it in a slightly different way?
Well, everyone, that's the point about an interview. It's a conversation. Okay, or it can be an argument. But
it was great TV. It was great TV, that's for sure.
So look, Ange and I both participated in that, right? And so it's live. It's two people with strong views, and it's two people with views who at that time are not necessarily aligned or are coming at it from different angles. That's the nature of the game, and. It's actually really important to have those discussions. They can be had in many ways, and often that's that can't be planned. But it's incredibly important that football actually continues to have those discussions. So let me put it this way: I would like to think that in future we have a media in Australia who are prepared to ask those questions. And I'd like to think that we have coaches who are prepared to be asked those questions. Okay? And that's not always the case, Daniel. We have a media that many people don't want to sit and actually ask national coaches those questions. And I've asked every national coach those questions. And we actually have many coaches who don't want to be asked. Okay? So, my reflection on it is that you had someone prepared to ask and you had someone prepared to front up and answer. And the result is the result. In the end, I think the result has been incredibly beneficial for the game in many respects, because what it's about is that essence of actually having that discussion.
Yeah, trust you're enjoying this episode of Greats with Garby with Craig Foster. He is fantastic, and he's going to be speaking about his playing career in just a moment. You do not get Craig Foster opening up on all the ups and downs of his playing career too often. I warn you, Listen out to all of this. It is absolutely fantastic. In the meantime, though, a thank you to our sponsor. That is Lockdown Essentials for this episode. At this critical time for our country, lockdownessentials.com.au are keeping you safe with disposable face masks, hand sanitizer, and plenty other products that you need to get through this pandemic. They are experiencing incredible demand at the moment, so make sure you log on and order what you need at lockdownessentials.com.au. That is lockdownessentials, one word, .com.au. They provide free shipping across Melbourne, but they distribute all over Australia. It's great to have them keeping families safe and great to have them on board as a supporter of Greats with Garby. Let's get back to Fozzie. I want to talk about your playing career, Foz, because a lot of people don't know about it in great detail if they didn't grow up in that era. But you were a fantastic footballer and a crucial part of the Socceroos at a time when a lot more could have been achieved. But take us back to the beginning, because you come from a town called Lismore, which is, I looked up, 9 hours by car from Sydney. How does a boy from Lismore, from what I understand, without coming from a strong football family, go on to have the career that you had? It sounds like an incredible tale, and I dare say you owe a lot to your parents.
Look, that's true. But let's put it in, appropriate context. I wasn't, a Paul Ocon, I wasn't a Harry Kewell, I wasn't a Timmy Cahill, I wasn't a Mark Viduka. And I'm the first to recognise that. In fact, I kind of love that, and it's why I love the players so much, it's why I respected playing for the country so much, because I recognised that I was playing with a bunch of guys who were incredibly gifted and talented. Look, I was a talented young player, and I went to the first Junior World Cup under 16s, and Trimmers, Paul Tremboli, is just a wonderful guy, a great personality within Australian football, a real gentleman, was in that team, and I ended up out of that World Cup where we made the quarterfinal. It was in China in 1985. It was the first under 16 World Cup ever. Of course, subsequently became under 17, and I ended up making the team of that tournament. So we don't have the vision from then, but I must have, played okay. And then what happened was I came back, and in the first game back in Lismore, which is a regional country area, the club that I was with said, look, and the council, the mayor said, look, we'd like you to play one more game before you go to the Australian Institute of Sport, just for the whole town can come out. I was 15. And I said, okay, I'm happy to do that. I had a scholarship at the AES waiting. And what happened is I went into that game. I was playing first division against the men, and I copped a really bad tackle, destroyed my right knee. And so I had a reconstruction in 1985. Now, people who've had that know that it's like a 8-inch long scar, and it was a very different operation to what subsequently happened. So I kind of had that hurdle then, and it took me some years to get back to international level. And the result of that was that I deeply respected. In other words, I had to fight very hard to get there.
Yep, very
hard. I had to overcome then, a number of broken bones and a whole heap of stuff. So by the time I got to play for the Socceroos, it meant something very, very special. And I think that also played into what happened on air, when Australia was playing in big games like 05 qualifier, right? That's what it was about. To me, it's incredibly meaningful. And my family was a big sport family. My father was he was a state champion sprinter and a very talented cricketer and tennis player. And for them, for the town, for the family, it was incredibly important to have someone to go on and play for the country. And so, for that reason, that's always been a part of my life since. In other words, I have deep respect for the players and the sacrifices they make. I have respect for the playing profession, and that's why I'm an ex-chairman of the PFA. I believe deeply in the Socceroos Matildas and what they represent to the country, which I'm always talking about the way I think that we might play, but also the importance of the international dimension of football. So all of those themes came through that period of, really having to battle hard to get to pull that first jersey on.
There must have been some crazy car trips, though, to go to trainings and that in juniors and representative teams and so on and so forth. From Lismore to Sydney, I dare say, that your parents sacrificed.
Well, that's true. So that's also plays a big role in my life today, Daniel, because what happens is, people often say to me, well, why now do you spend most of your time in human rights and helping refugee and Indigenous kids and all these things? And it's because of what I was given in order to sit here and talk to you. So it wasn't just me. And every athlete knows that's the case. And not every person recognises that's the case for them, but very often it is. And I feel that very, very strongly. And that's why I feel a very strong obligation to use every tool at my disposal to help other people, particularly those who weren't given what I was given. So I had a stable family. Okay? So what does that mean for kids who are orphaned, or kids who come from war-torn areas, or kids who are abused by their close family members? Okay, so there's 3 types of kids that I'm predisposed to fighting for. Got it? Then when we had to go to training, I was in Lismore. We had to drive 9 hours, as you said, down to Newcastle every weekend. My father was a mechanic. He had his own business. And he would, we would go and play in the under 15s, and then I'd play first division. We'd finish by 3 p.m. The car would be packed with food. Both of my brothers were very talented players. They all went to the OAS. We would get at least 2 of us, maybe 3 in the back of the station wagon. My mother would have packed the food. And we would drive 9 hours and arrive at Newcastle at like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
Right? And we'd be asleep, and he would drive. We'd get up at 10, we'd train, we'd get back in the car. He would then drive through the night, drinking 20 coffees. We'd get back early morning, Monday morning, and he would then go to work at 6 a.m. in the morning, to run his business, through which he needed the money in order to buy our boots, right? So what does that say to me today as a 51-year-old, ex-Socceroo? What it says to me is that that's a gift I was given by a family that many people don't have. Many people don't have people in their life who are going to drive 18 hours every weekend. That was probably 3 months of the year, because that was representative football, right? Many people don't have that gift. That's a gift. And without that, I might have found a way somehow, but that played a very significant role in, enabling me to do what I was able to do. And so I have an obligation to give that to others. So what does that mean? It means if I have to go away for my children, then I do so. But it also means that I have to go out of my way to, as far as I possibly can, for people who don't have that gift from whoever, from their family or within their life. And that's just a sense of gratitude and responsibility. They're the 2 words that I really feel strongly about. And so all of those stories just inform the way I view the world today and how it is that I want to live my life.
It's a remarkable tale. After the AIS, you go to Sydney, Croatia, then Marconi, then you have a stint in Hong Kong, but you came back and played for Adelaide City, and it seemed as though that's when your career really blossomed in the mid-90s, and you went to another level under Zoran Matic, I dare say. What was it about Zoran and Adelaide City at that time that took you to the next level as a footballer?
So what happened is I ended up playing in Asia. I couldn't quite hit my level. I was still trying to come back and work it out for whatever reason. I ended up in Asia. I played in, because a lot of players were going across to Asia at that time, because don't forget the NSL was only 6 months of the year. So I, as a young player, I hadn't hit a level to go to Europe yet, which, probably at 15 I was, bound to do. I mean, after that World Cup, I was invited by Bayern Munich. I was invited by Glasgow Rangers. I was invited by a Swiss club. And then I come back and destroyed my knee, right? So what happened is I was kind of on this trajectory, and all of a sudden it didn't happen, and I ended up going across to Singapore with Warren Spink, Socceroo, and, playing there just in the off-season to continue to try and work and play all year round. Anyway, I enjoyed it, and I ended up staying, and in fact I went on Hong Kong. And what happened was another really important moment and a lesson, because I was in Hong Kong, we were being successful, and, there was a lot of, there was, relatively speaking, very lucrative for players there at that time in Southeast Asian football. And I decided, that I wanted to play for Australia, and that I was prepared to do whatever it took to achieve that end. And that was all that was important to me. And everyone in my life, well, most people, said, look, you'd be mad to go back because there's no guarantee, and here you can set yourself up for life financially and all of these things, which is natural, even people who love you.
Yep.
And that's perfectly good advice. But I decided that wasn't meaningful to me. And that's kind of been the way that I've run my life in every respect. When I was on air at SBS, I was never, ever concerned about keeping the job. In fact, multiple chairmen of and CEOs of FFA, wrote to the chairs of SBS and tried to have me removed. And I would say, well, if you want to remove me, you're perfectly welcome. But I'm here to do the job in a way that I think is appropriate for the game, not for me. And that's not about popularity. It's about football.
Yeah.
And that was skirting a very fine line sometimes. But that's because the economic, the contract, the position was never about popularity, and it was never about money, or you wouldn't be at SBS. It was about belief in a mission. And the mission when I was a player was to play for Australia, and hopefully then, to go abroad. But it was only to play for Australia. I wanted that one jersey. I did not want to retire and say, well, I didn't put everything on the line for it. So I came back to Australia, and what I decided was, well, where am I going to go? Zoran remembered me, but I think I just called up Zoran Matic. I didn't know him. And I said, listen, you guys were the champions last year in 94. And this is coming into 95, and, I'm coming back from Asia. And he said, I remember who you are. You're at Sydney, Croatia, whatever. And I said, yeah, listen, so I want to come play for you. And he said, well, we don't really have any spots. I said, well, don't worry, I'll just come down and train. And what I decided was, if I can play and succeed with the current champions, and they had like 7 or 8 internationals or something like that in the, that was Tony Vidmar, Damien Murray, Alex Tobin, Robbie Zabika ended up being Jason Petkovic. So they had at least 5 or 6 or 7 internationals. So it was half the Socceroos, Milan Ivanovic. So I decided if I can play in that team, I can play for the Socceroos. And so I went down. I had some bad injury problems again, and the club kind of said, look, we think that you're not ever going to be fit. And I said, and Zoran again said, listen, we can't afford your constant injuries and so on. I said, well, don't even worry. Just pay me whatever you said you can. I'm coming back for season 2. That's how bad it was. And thankfully to Zoran's, why I love him, he said, okay, I'll tell the board that you come there. And that season, first season I've been injured. Second season, I'm pretty sure I earned something like $8,000. And I lived in a house owned by the club. And we became very close friends. Johnny Gibson, Jason Petkovic. And I lived with kids, and I was 24, nearly 25, but, they were kind of late teens. So that was the extent of it. That was the level at which I was prepared to go in order to play for Australia. Wow. Okay, and during that entire period, everyone was back in Hong Kong and Singapore having a great time, saying you're an idiot, you got to come back here. So it was really interesting, because everyone has those moments in their life. That's the point. The point is and this is what COVID-19's done. It's made everyone have that moment. Everyone looks in the mirror and goes, well, you know what?
Yeah.
Geez, I was working 24 hours a day, and now I'm just reflecting on my life. Is that really what I want? What is it?
Yep.
What mark do I want to leave? Or, how do I want to spend every precious moment of my life? And it's my choice, and others shouldn't make that choice for me. And more people around the world are doing that today. I did that in 94 when I said that's just not going to work for me, and I don't care if I don't earn money. What I need to do is I need to achieve what I truly seek, and that's to play for Australia. So I broke my foot 3 times. It was a disaster. And then in the end, I was so eager that the club said, listen, you better go away and come back next season, because you just keep training on it. You can't rehabilitate properly. You're too keen. So I went away, come back, and then in the off season, I prepared myself physically to the level of international. By the time I came back, I was so fit I could play 180 minutes. And the work and the pain and the waiting all came together in the first half of the season. So, in other words, the difficulties pile up and up and up and up and up. And then if you still persevere and get through it, in the end, it's very quick. The success comes very quick. That's why people say, quick success is years in the making.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to get there, but when it happens in an instant. And all of a sudden, you're in the Socceroos, you're playing, you've scored 8 goals in the first half of the season, you're being talked about as a Socceroo, you're in the squad, you play against Ghana it's over before you blink. But the work and the pain to get there, takes many, many years.
Fantastic. And not long after that, Terry Venables steps into the Socceroos coaching ranks. And, there's an acceleration in the development of the team. The ultimate goal's not achieved, of course, and we'll get on to Iran 97 in a moment. But a team full of talented players, similar to what happened with Hiddink in 05, clicks, and you can see the quality all coming together. I know you had a special relationship with Venables. What was it about him that made him a great coach?
Well, yeah, look, I liked him, but, all the players liked him, but it's not like I spent much time with him. I think the relationship was simply that he knew that I understood his football. Okay, so, every coach understands that you need a number of players who are quasi-captains, or at least, they're aligned with your football and they understand what's necessary on the pitch. Okay? And I got his football immediately. So you asked about Zoran. Zoran's football was very structured. It was systematic. And I got that immediately. I understood it. I understood where everyone needed to be. And so I got the whole picture very quickly, and it made perfect sense to me. And it's very much aligned with, my thinking on the game, which later I would take on air in terms of my analysis. So the teams that I excelled in were the ones where there was a very clear style of play, very clear system of play, and I knew what was happening, well ahead of time, right? And I could direct my teammates according to whatever was happening in the game. So, and that's why you were talking about when we were just watching a game in South Africa at Camps Back. Yeah. That's the way I saw the game as a player. That is, like a tactics board. I could see what was happening. I could see what we were supposed to be doing. And then, coaches like Zoran and Terry would then obviously identify, okay, this guy, is able to do what is necessary for this group. So that's why I, if you like, excelled under that football, because right from the first session, and I also loved it, right from the first session, Terry had brought, I asked him later, I said, listen, that wasn't your football at QPR, right? You did not learn this football in England, okay? Because the football that he had has now been improved and evolved, but essentially is the football of Guardiola that he's brought to Manchester City. It's the same theory. It's just different movements and at a higher level. What the first session with Terry was, a number of boxes, everyone in the boxes, everyone starts moving in between boxes. No two people can be in the same box at the same time. You've got rotations of players, So this football was there in 97. And I asked him, where did you get this from? And he said, I found it at Barcelona. Okay? Yep. And I said, well, how did you go to Barcelona as the coach and then just work it out? And he said, well, what I did is I walked in and I said to the assistants, listen, you guys just take the sessions and I'll watch for a while because I want to assess the players. But in actual fact, what he was doing is he's trying to work the football out. He was trying to work the methods out because, this wasn't in England at that time. Yeah. So if you put that story in context with when I came back on air, for example, that's what I'd been through. That's what I was talking about in terms of the progression of Australian coaching. I had seen what was here. I knew exactly what was happening here. I'd been under the best system, the AES. I knew all the rest of them. And I'd been under this and I understood the difference between them. Yeah. And that's what informed, the whole period of saying, okay, listen, we need to analyse on air and we need to, talk about a different level of methodology. We need to look at systems of play. We need to talk about rotations of players, with all that stuff. I'd experienced all that already in 97 as a player. So, that all of those experiences are important as a devotee or as an analyst or, whatever it is. That is very much my view in the game. So, for instance, later then when I saw Guardiola's Barcelona, and everyone, of course, knew that, I loved it, right? Yeah. Is because I saw the same football. I saw the same elements. I saw the same syncopation. I saw the same synchronization. I saw the same methodology. And my view was and is that, that's part of the secret, to moving forward. That's also why I enjoyed Bielsa, and I talked about Bielsa as an Australian coach, and now I'm delighted to see he's doing well with Leeds. It's the same stuff. It's micro and macro. Yep. Micro techniques, which Barca and others call functional technique, micro techniques, which fit into a system of play, which is very structured, based on the opponent. Perhaps is a little bit mechanised with Bielsa, but that's essentially the football that we were playing with the Socceroos back in '97, and that's why the players loved it. There was some freedom, but the players all excelled and played wonderful football, because when you're all on this same picture and you've got constant movement. So, when you talk about the principles of beautiful football, constant movement, triangulation, these things, that was all there at a basic level. And Venables put that into place with the Socceroos in a very short space of time.
Yep.
Okay. So once again, this type of thinking informs, my 20 years on air, because, often you'll hear people say, well, it takes several seasons to do this, that, and that. But, so that's not right. I knew that and many Australian coaches would say that at the time. Okay. And they would say, well, our players are not capable of doing these things. And I would say, well, hang on, we just did that with the 97 group. Yeah. So, these are the discussions that used to happen back then, but our players aren't capable. And I would say, well, hang on a minute. No, that's not right. Because we went from that to that in about 4 or 5 sessions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So this is about A, methodology, and B, communication, and B, and C, expertise.
Yep.
So I'll give you another example. Later I bought, so because I was thinking along these lines, later I bought some Barca youth coaches out to Australia, and we coach young kids. And this goes to now the heart of production of players in Australia, which I'm really worried about. And everyone's now trying to reinvent the wheel and be seen as, that they've come up with something new. The reality is there's many great methodologies around the world. And one of the best is, and certainly was in the early parts of 2000, was Barca. I bought their coaches out here. So it's another good example about coaching, okay, that used to happen in the 80s, 90s, and that I was trying to change. And I wasn't the only one, but eventually we were successful in creating a far higher professional standard of methodology and innovation and understanding. So what happened with the Barca coaches, I would see many young kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in Australia, running around the park, and in my view, they weren't learning anything. But the coaches were saying that they were doing a good job. Okay? So I thought, well, look, I can't fight against this unless I know what the alternative is. So I went to Barca twice, and then I brought their coach here. We took the under-8s, under-10s, under-12s of the Eastern Suburbs Football Association, male young players, and we took them for 7 days. Well, sorry, the coach took them, but, a bunch of us came and watched. Right? And he took us through the methodology. And from day one, and I filmed it. I filmed everything. On day one, so this would be probably, this might be kind of 08, 09 or something. We played the kids, got the kids to play a game, okay? Under-8s, under-10s, under-12s. On day 7, we got them to play the game. And if you saw the difference between day 1 and day 7, you would be nothing short of staggered, okay? The kids' understanding had advanced years. I mean, that's ridiculous to say, but it's the truth. When I talk about years, I'm talking about what they would normally get in the Australian context. Their functional technique, that is how to control the ball according to any situation, was already advancing very well. Their understanding of the game had advanced in 1 week, 7 sessions every night. Okay? So what that meant was it allowed me to then say publicly, listen, we have a huge amount of time with young players, but we're not being effective.
Yeah.
And we don't have the right methodology and understanding to advance the players' technique or understanding, right? And so, that became another, if you like, challenge. That became another project to try and bring us forward in terms of the coaching of young kids. That's part of the that's very much part of the responsibility of former players, firstly. Okay, so we are obligated to engage in that discussion. And secondly, I think the media has to play a significant role in that, in amplifying these issues.
Most certainly. And we saw rapid development with Venables. We saw it with Hiddink. We saw it with Ange Postecoglou when he came in. The way that the team played within a matter of months, complete transformation and for the better. And we saw Australia play pretty much like Barcelona for the first half against Iran, to the point where it should have been 6-0, and that's not an exaggeration. I watched the game a month or so ago, and I'm still in disbelief at the amount of chances, and more to the point, the brilliant football that was played in that first half. It's traumatic, Craig, for everyone to go over it again. I'm sure you, as someone who was on that pitch, more so than anyone else. But what would you pinpoint as the thing that went wrong? Was it the missed chances? Was it the net being pulled down? Was it the offside trap? What, for you, stood out more than anything else as to why that catastrophe in Australian football occurred?
The Iran disaster occurred for one reason and one reason only, and that is because of the intervention of the person who ran on the field. So any player will tell you that right throughout that game, until that point in the game, and I don't even know what point it is, I don't want to know the minute, I've never watched it again, I don't even want to know about it, but the only thing I do know is that until that point, Iran were gone. They knew they were gone, and we knew they were gone. And in that game, there was no position in that game for them, not technically, not tactically, and not psychologically. So they knew that they were inferior, and we knew that we were superior. And we didn't put the chances away, that's true, but there was no way that anything was going to occur in that game because they could not work out how to deal with our system of play and a group of players who were confident, on form, and doing it well in front of 85,000 people. Okay, so the psychological, in my view, the psychological situation they were in, with the crowd now, just right with Australia playing in a way that we believed in. We knew that we were good. We knew we had great players. There was no coming back. When that intervention occurred, the guy jumped on the net. That stopped the game. That did a number of things. Not only did it stop our momentum, it actually enabled them to reconvene and break, if you like, the kind of psychological, environment that they were in, and it changed. So the only question after that is that was the reason. The question is, how should Venables have reacted to that? And then there's a whole range of views about that. But the answer to your question is that person running on was the intervention. Could we have dealt with it better afterwards? Quite possibly. Perhaps not. Who knows? But that's what killed us, because until then we were going to France. I mean, that was just, you look at the players that we had on that pitch. The reality is, of course, we weren't ready to go to France as a game. We were ready to go as a team, but the game was nowhere near ready going. So, history had a way of just doing it at the appropriate time, in the right way. It just, and that wasn't us. The game was a mess then. Yeah. And if we had have gone to France, the danger, in fact, the certainty is it would have just entrenched the mess.
Yeah.
And what happened is we were able to break that mess. We were able to reconstitute the game and then make it at the perfect time, pre-A-League, post-Lowy. So in the end, that's the only way that we can kind of, deal with it.
I was going to say, it provides little comfort to you and the rest of the guys on that pitch who had your World Cup dream ruined, but that is the solace, I guess, that occurs. But, we've seen many a devastating, in a sporting context, tragic moment on the field. I can't imagine what that would have been like in that dressing room. We've heard people say it was deathly silence and all that. Can you give us some sort of insight into what on earth is going on in that dressing room after that?
Well, I'll tell you just a short story a month after, because don't forget that team, people might say rightly, the Confederations Cup is not so important to Brazil and Mexico and so on. Of course, it's not a World Cup. But it's still it was the first time the Confederations Cup occurred, later that year in 97 in Saudi Arabia. And of course, we made the final there. We beat Mexico, beat Uruguay, and performed as that team could. Iran went to France 98 and performed creditably, and as they know and they admit today. I mean, we were a superior group of players, because they had some brilliant players, but they lacked depth. They had Ali Daei, Azizi, but the rest, whereas we had, a predominance of players playing in top leagues, and some who were, some legends of the history of Australian football. In the dressing room, I just remember tears and silence. But the thing that really summed it up for me was because it was a tragedy. It was a tragedy in our life, which, you wouldn't like to compare to, someone passing away, but it was a tragedy on a really extreme emotional level because it's in front of 85,000 Australians. You know that the entire country's watching. Like, this very serious, tragedy for your career, for your, there's no way you can reflect on that and not come out of that thinking about how bad it is. Nothing good. And so it must have been about a month later, I was playing in England then, and we got on the plane to go across to Saudi Arabia and meet the rest of the squad. And I just remember a bunch of us meeting up. I remember Stanley Laz was there from West Ham at the time and some others. And all I remember is during that month, you didn't speak to anyone about it, didn't really speak to family about it. There was no one else who understood. Like, who are you going to talk to it about, right? You've been in there, you've been on that field. No one's going to listen. And so we're very much in our own heads. And then we got back together, and on the flight on the way over to Saudi Arabia, we talked about it. And it was the first time I would have talked about it since that night. And that was emotional.
Yeah.
That was emotional. And it would, I guess in the field of psychology, they would talk about, this release, this finally dealing with trauma, the stages of trauma. I don't want to over-sensationalize it. I'm just saying, as a sports person in that context, that's very traumatic.
It makes complete sense. That discussion then, was it confrontational? Did people point out certain things that it get to a level where you're like, all right, we need to get this all out now. We need to point out things that we've been stewing over for a month, or was it just an emotional release?
Just emotional release, because we just needed to deal with it. We just needed to have people around us who'd actually lived through it as well. And, we talked about what had actually happened, of course, but, just more about, oh, man, what a disaster, how you're dealing with it. So it was, cathartic.
Yeah.
It was cathartic. And the month before would have just been horrible. So, it was difficult. And as you said, the only way we can comfort ourselves, I think, are those who went on later to get through.
Yep.
Which was wonderful, or the rest of us, I think we just have to say the game wasn't ready.
And that's the way you can deal with it. Thankfully, your career still had some levels to go to and some wonderful experiences to be had. Terry Venables takes you to Portsmouth along with John Aloisi, Robbie Ennis, Hamilton Thorpe and Paul Harries. Thorpe and Harries leave. Yourself and Johnny end up having good careers in England for a period. You went to Crystal Palace, and that's when you really played some time in the Championship. What stands out for you more than anything else from your time in the Championship with Crystal Palace?
Well, I have good and bad memories, because the bad memories are the fact that, at that time, a lot of the clubs were experiencing the financial difficulties. And, of course, they were all going into administration. Not all, but many of them were. They had that period there of about 10 years when all the clubs were overspending. And the broadcast deals in England were escalating rapidly. And so, that caused all of the clubs below to make massive investments that weren't sustainable to try and get there, to get that broadcast money, or to stay in the Premier League, which was the case with Crystal Palace. And both of them had severe financial difficulties. So the best memory from Crystal Palace is just how the players pulled together, how the fans pulled together. I had the opportunity to captain the team at that time for a period, and there was real emotion. That was the emotion of football, because when people's club is threatened, you see the real passion and the real love, and you see, the players really pull together to try and save the club, whether it's trying to help out, financially, or whether it is just pulling together on the field with the fans. There was a real sense of unity, us against them. The very lifeblood of their life, this club, was in real jeopardy. And so there was multiple owners. And so off-field is an absolute mess. But on-field in the dressing room, people have a common cause with the fans. And that's often a beautiful feeling. It can be created in many ways. You hope that it's not created through financial disaster. But nevertheless, it's one of the really beautiful essence of football. That is players and fans together in pursuit of a common goal, which just happened to be survival at that time. And to keep their club going and to keep it at that level of football, which, we were all able to achieve.
People listening to this would have guarded pretty quickly that you are so incredibly proud to be an Australian football advocate, to have played for the Socceroos and to have stood up for the game. Therefore, when you were at Palace, what did it mean to you to prove to people in your environment that Australians can play the game of football?
That wasn't really a huge focus. I think, we had players, Australia had players by that time at the very highest peak of the game, So Crystal Palace is a club that has had a number of Australian captains, and that I was, pleased about, is that, Australians were constantly going abroad and being able to show their leadership capacity. And I was really pleased about that. So, Tony Popovich had been captain. I think Nicky Carr was captain at some point. I was captain. Muskie was captain there. Carl Viet might even have been captain. So, it has a rich history of leadership by Australians on the field.
And subsequently, Mile Jedinak, of course.
Oh, of course, yeah. Mile, would be the greatest of all of those as the captain, as a legend, both of the Eagles and Australia. So, Mile followed a bunch that had come prior to him. And so that's important. That's what we love as players, and I was just a part of that lineage, which is something that I treasure. Today we've got, I think, Mustafa Amini's a captain, and you always find that Australian players have very often undertake leadership positions. Craig Moore, of course, came there to Palace to play and also was a captain, with us. So, that's important. I believe that Australian players are capable of performing at the various highest level of the world in football. We do it in every other sport. But also, I do have a sense that there are strong leadership capabilities in our own players. And, many have been able to bring that out in across European clubs everywhere.
I'm loving having the chance to talk to you about actual football in your time in the game, because I don't think we get Craig Foster in this environment a lot. You love to talk about other issues, which we love listening to you on, but it's great to hear you talk about these sorts of issues as well, because you're a better player than people will remember. The best player you ever played with then, Foz? I'm keen to really get you to think about that and give us the insight as to who the best player that you ever played with was and why.
Well, I always try to avoid talking about my own career because my view is, I'm not I wasn't Maradona, I wasn't Harry Kewell, I wasn't Tim Cahill, and I wasn't, Paul Ocon, who was just an amazing footballer. And so, I'm always happy to talk about the lessons from it, and I talk about that in schools and all other things. But I see little point unless you're Maradona, So, I'm much more comfortable talking the issues around the game, what football means, what it does for us, the lessons that I learned through it. One of the lessons I learned through it was try not to play too often against Brazilians because we had the real misfortune to play against them twice in a week. Okay. Now, in 2006, we played them, of course, in the group stage, but that's once. And whilst we upset them, I don't know what would have happened if we played them again in the quarterfinal or final. So in the 97 Confed Cup, we played the super team that made the final of the 98 World Cup 6 months later. We're not talking about any Brazil here. We're talking about one of the classic great Brazil teams. Yep. And unfortunately, they messed up the final. Well, fortunately if you're French, but they messed up the final, unfortunately for football, because they never put up, the real game that we could have experienced in the 98 final. So we played them in the Confed Cup in the group and we had 0-0. And I must say, I've never watched the game back, but I'm pretty sure that Bozza had a bit of a blinder that day, right? So, but I remember distinctly being in the game. I was playing on the right-hand side and Kevin Muscat was the right back and I was right midfield. I can't remember the system we were playing, but it was Venables, so we must have been we We might have been playing a 3-5-2 then. And so what happened is I had Danielson. So on the left of their team was Danielson and Roberto Carlos. And, and so the first, in the first 15 minutes, those who don't know Danielson and the modern generation wouldn't know him. He was the most expensive player in the world. He went from, I think, Brazil to Real Betis for 23 million. I'm not sure if it was euros at that time, but so he's he's incredible. He's a futsal player on a football field, okay? And he was famous for stepovers. So Ronaldo would do 1-2 at speed. Danielson would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I never seen more stepovers. You will never see, And so what happened was this guy came at me with the ball and he started doing stepovers. And I was just trying to wait, like, when am I going to get a tackle here? I don't know how many he's going to have. And he probably did 6 or 7, right? And I don't know. I may well have done a full swivel. Who knows, right? Like one of those cartoons where your head's just on, it's just turning circles, right? And what happened is, anyway, he went past me. And as we came back for a corner, I remember, because Muskie was always a cheeky bugger, just like he is in real life, right? That's why I love him. And he said to me at the corner, he said, Foz, I said, yeah, mate. He said, you okay or what after that? Right? And, of course, I told him where to go, right? I said, listen, you can do this, that, and the other. So what happened is, anyway, about 10 minutes later, Roberto Carlos has gone at Muskie, and he's gone 1, 2, 3. I think he's put the ball through his legs, gone around him, hit it the most perfect cross in, right? And they've just gone over the bar with a header from Ronaldo. And I ran back. It was the fastest sprint I'd made in my career. I was straight in Muskie's face, straight to him. I said, Muskie, you okay, buddy, or what? And the expletives that coming out of his mouth, you could only imagine, right? And we were both laughing. We're just laughing and just said, look, wow. So anyway, we had 0-0. And I always, and again, you talk about on-air, post-playing career. What I saw in those, and then we played them in the final, and, of course, Dukes got himself sent off very early in the game, and we probably played 70 minutes or something like that against probably the best team in the world, and certainly the most technically talented. And that was Juninho Pernambucano, or it might have been Paulista. That was the 3 R's: Rivaldo, Ronaldo, and Romario. So, your younger generation of A-League fans and W-League fans probably need to Google them, but just have a look, for God's sake. Seriously. 3 of the greatest players the world's ever seen on the same field, okay, with 2 of the best fullbacks in the history of the game. Cafu right, Roberto Carlos left. Throw in Danielson, just a trick master, right? Dunga in the centre was just the one guy who couldn't play, and you had these 10 unbelievable players around him just having fun against 10 men. So that was a horror show. Anyway, what happened is even after the 0-0 draw, I remember walking off the field, and one of the smartest guys I've met in football in Australia, and one of the nicest, of course, but a really clever guy. I was at the OES together with him, is Paul Trimboli.
Yeah.
Okay. Trimmers is a smart guy. Okay. And he was on the bench, and we had 0-0. And as we were walking off, I never forget, he walked just up to me. We're very good friends. And he said, Foz, mate, they're playing a different game. And I looked at him, and I this is immediately after the game, and I looked at him and just kind of thought about it, and I said to him, yeah, you're right, actually. That's exactly what they're doing. You're spot on, right? And from that time, I kind of made it my business, in part, to work out what they were doing differently. But they were playing a different game. The rules were the same, and we had a hell of a team. Those guys were different, and they thought different. I'll give you another example. We came into the and every country has its own culture, so I'm not suggesting that everyone should do this. It just is a good example of the difference. And it makes you reflect on your own, how we approach things. We went into the kind of tunnel, and we're about to come out, and we're just all there, and the Aussies are there, ready to go. A good bunch of players, by the way. Talking about some of the greatest legends in our history, and who knew what they were doing. Anyway, we were kind of quiet, just talking to each other. Anyway, next thing you hear the music, and here comes the Brazil team out of their dressing room. They open the door, there's all the samba going on. It's like a party in there. And they just come out and they were dancing, holding hands. So they were holding hands like a conga line, and they just come out and they actually were dancing, okay? And, you know, I remember just kind of looking around at our guys and just thinking, yeah, okay, that's cool, but that's different, right? And, you know, that kind of plays, you know, so all those experiences give you a sense of this concept of, you know, the cultural differences in football and how countries play in a particular way and how the culture of your country infuses your game, and that might then start to become this issue around, well, how should a country play? You know, should you play according to your culture, and what happens when you try not to do that? And all of those types of all that type of thinking, which I often talked about on air, comes out of those experiences where I saw those guys doing that, and then they did what they did on the field, and I thought, you know what, Trimmers, you're right. They are playing a different game, and we want part of that. We want part of that brilliance. We want part of that quality. How can we get it? We haven't solved that puzzle yet.
Yeah, it was 6-0 in the final, 3 to Romario, 3 to Ronaldo, and I think that sufficiently answers the question, best player you've played against, Fozzie, in the best possible way that you could have answered it, because, a wonderful story for us to have an insight on. I want to ask you this, though. You're so passionate about Australian players. You've had a wonderful insight into many a generation. The best Australian player, then, that you've played with in your time, the one that really stood out above all others?
Now, that's tough because a number of them did, just in different ways. You know, I would have to say probably, you know, there's probably, you know, 5 at least, you know, who I really have tremendous respect for and I think were brilliant in different ways. One of those is Harry. You know, Harry could perform as I started playing with him when he was 19. Of course, he started when he was 17, I think. But when he was 19, we played against Iran. You know, people have to remember, you know, he scored, you know, he scored in both legs, right?
Yeah.
But he scored the goal away, okay? And that's because this 19-year-old kid, he just didn't care where he was. You know, and you could see in him, you know, this just supreme self-confidence and just, I don't care where I am, who I'm against, just give me the ball, okay? And you know, we all love players like that. Even teammates love players like that, right? And then there was, you know, Ned, of course, you know. Ned Zelic was just a silky, you know, technically brilliant player, huge long stride. Just he would glide past players on the field in a way that just would make your head spin, you know. He would just set them up and go past them, and they wouldn't even know what. So it was like just a whiff of wind, right? They had no chance whatsoever to tackle him. You know, you go watch him run past players through midfield or as sweeper into midfield, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Change of pace. He was fast because he had long legs, powerful, right? And that was a gift that I always loved. You know, we all would love to have that, right? And then there was Paul Ocon, whose pass quality was just unbelievable. You play with Paul and you get a real sense. You can't off the screen. The left and right foot, but the precision in passing and the perfection of technique was a kid who must have spent thousands of hours just pass. It was just beautiful to watch. I used to watch him on the game, in my team, and just think, wow, that's a beautiful pass. Right? I mean, it was just brilliant. But then, you know, how can you put any of those above Mark Viduka? You know, because Dukes, you would just give him the ball anywhere. It doesn't matter, any defender in the world or two. Unbelievable dexterity for a guy that was over 6 foot, you know, and big. You know, he wasn't lithe. He was kind of heavy and yet incredible. Shooting precision, brilliant, power, you know, and just brains. You know, brains. I mean, he knew the game. He was very naturally gifted, Mark, but technically he was unbelievable. So, you know, he's a type of player who could have played in many positions because he was just a smart guy. I could see what was around him. And then I also really enjoyed playing, and I have deep respect for Craig Moore as a player.
Okay.
You know, when you know, with the Socceroos, he'd just play in defence, which often meant just simple role. I saw him when he came to Crystal Palace. He came, I think, down from Glasgow Rangers. He decided to leave there, and he'd been there a number of years. And I was already in the national team with him. And he came to Crystal Palace and started playing in the midfield alongside me. And I had never seen him in the midfield. And I thought, wow, what a fantastic footballer. You know, he was just a really accomplished, smart, technically strong player. And it gave me a new sense of, you know, just how really gifted Craig was. And a lot of people wouldn't have seen that across his career because he was a smart player. He would just do what was necessary. Yeah. You know, he would distribute the ball and his distribution was superb, but he wouldn't try to overdo. You know, that was his mentality. Just do your job and do the thing and get the thing done and let's win the game. Whereas when he got into midfield and you saw him getting out of situations and having to manage the game and manage the team, he was quite brilliant. So there's many.
I think the dog concurred with all of your nominations, Foz. As I said, we don't get you on a level like this where you're happy to indulge and go back in time and speak about football from the era in which you played, and it's great to hear. As much as has been wonderful to hear your theories on the game and going through your times at SBS and the wonderful work you're doing now in the human rights movement. You've lived an awesome life and there is so much more to come. It's clear to see. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's great. It's been a treat for Australian football fans and sporting fans alike because there are so many lessons that we can learn from it and so many great stories that we've enjoyed. So, Craig Foster, thanks so much.
Thanks, Garby. It's been my absolute pleasure.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.